Arcanum by Cor Alaran. Chapter 7, Part 1. Ruby woke up with the taste of death in her mouth, rolled out of bed, and thudded onto the floor. She was about to whisper for Yang, only to feel the soft rug under her face and recall she was in the collegium. On a bed nearby, rolled over and wanting nothing to do with her, Weiss slept. There were towels on the floor covering splotches of yesterday's dinner. A rumble in her gut told her she was still not her best. Ruby clutched herself and moaned weakly, eyes flickering about in the low light of the early dawn. Where was a chamber pot when you needed one? Not under the bed where it should be, that was where. Gritting her teeth, she crawled over to Weiss's bed, ignoring all the warnings never to trespass, and rummaged around under there as well. Nothing. Her eyes fixed on the door leading to the washroom. The cool tiles of the washroom were refreshing, especially as she crawled across them dragging her face on the floor like a worm. The bath was out, and she wasn't about to figure out how to carry that downstairs. There still wasn't a chamber pot to see, but there was a privy made of some white pottery-like material. The problem was it didn't have a hole in the bottom to take anything away. It was just a bucket. Ruby's stomach roiled. There was no time to waste. Ugh! There was nothing like getting sick out of your system to feel better. Next to that, a wash in the river was just what the herbalist ordered. Tugging her robes over her head and leaving herself in a cream blouse and brown hose, she waded into the river, shivering in delight when the icy water splashed over her and chilled her to the bone. Compared to the nausea that had been threatening her the night before, the shock was a welcome one. Ducking under the water, she soaked and ran her fingers through her hair, coming back up and shaking it off, already feeling better than she had. "Man, I told you someone was dipping in the river." Ruby's head perked up as she heard the voice and looked to the riverbank. Guards, was her first thought, except that it wasn't perfectly accurate. The two boys wore the uniform and leather armor of the Collegium Guards, but they lacked the tabards, wore no helmets, and were unarmed. They were also young, very young, and not even sporting hair on their chins. "Nice day for a swim, eh?" The one who spoke was a faunus with blonde hair and a tail swinging behind him. He had a smile full of teeth that was for once not meant for her in a sinister manner. If anything, he seemed friendly. Ruby was instantly suspicious. "No, wait, they think I'm an Arcanist now. They think I'm noble or something." "I thought it was just us new bloods who had to wake up at the crack of dawn. Looks like there's an initiate taking after us." He wiped a theatrical tear from his eye. "I'm so proud to have inspired the next generation of Arcanists." "Don't be an idiot," the other, also blonde but human and rather nervous-looking, said, elbowing his friend in the side. He also looked friendly, though less confident about it. "Sorry about that. We're up early for morning training, and this guy thought he saw someone in the river. Wanted to make sure no one was drowning, and—" He cut off with a choke. "Son, what are you doing?" "What?" The faunus, son, apparently, had already removed his leather cuirass and was now pulling his burgundy tunic up over his head. Ruby couldn't help but notice his abs and think Yang would have liked to be where she was at that moment. "Still an hour until training. This guy has the right idea." So saying, the faunus tossed his tunic aside, kicked off his boots, and dove into the water, in just his breeches. He made a loud splash and cut through the current, coming back up on his back and spitting out crystal-clear water. "Damn, that's cold." He laughed. "Come on, John, it feels great." The other boy looked around nervously. There was no one around at that early hour, only the guards on the gates and the walls, and she'd chosen her spot away from those. The initiates in the dorms were all fast asleep. After a few seconds realizing that, he shrugged and followed the example of Sun, undressed down to his underclothes and walking into the water a little more gingerly. "Hey!" Sun cheered. "That's the spirit. Feels good, yeah?" "Would feel better after training," the boy replied, though not without a smile. "Cold water on sore muscles? Still, you're right. This is nice." His eyes flicked over to Ruby. "Still a little surprised to see an Arcanist up at this hour, though. Your guys' lessons aren't until 9, right?" Ruby nodded. "Oh, we haven't introduced ourselves." The boy stepped a little closer. "I'm John Arc. This is my friend Sun Wukong. We're both new bloods in the Collegium Guard." "Can't believe they still call us new bloods," Sun said defensively, earning a roll of the eyes from his friend. "We've been training for 2 years now. Why aren't we called old bloods, middle bloods? I hate being lumped in with the new kids." You can complain to Lieutenant Commander Winchester if you like. No thanks. I'd rather not be running laps around the collegium until my legs fall off. Sun laughed it off and looked right at her. What about you? He asked. What's your name? Ruby. Ruby. John tested the name. That's an interesting name. Sun snorted. What he means is, it's a girl's name. Well, yeah. Ruby rolled her eyes, standing up and grabbing her blouse, and then squeezing it to make some of the water drain out. That also had the effect of showing some of her stomach and making her blouse tighten, showing off the barest hint of curves to her chest. It also made the very wet and very much see-through material cling to her chest. She hadn't worn any underclothes or bindings since she knew she was going to get wet. I am a girl, John and Sun choked. They spun with loud splashes, babbling words she could barely understand. It was all too loud and high-pitched. Ruby stared at their bare backs, confused. Eventually their ranting became more understandable, mostly when John cried out, You're a girl? Yes. She rolled her eyes. It wasn't that hard to figure out. Why are you both looking away? Because you're a girl, Sun said. Because you're naked. Naked? Ruby looked down at herself, leather hose and a blouse. Her feet were bare, and sure she'd heard some really weird bards talk about poetry around a woman's ankles. But she hadn't taken that seriously. Her feet were underwater, too. No, I'm not. Well, not naked, Sun amended. But your blouse has gone all see-through. And what, you've never seen someone's chest before? Just put some clothes on, John begged. Please. Ruby sighed, but did as asked, being done with her bath anyway. She didn't see what they were so worked up about herself. People bathed in the river all the time down in the slums, and it wasn't like you could expect to find a spot alone. She'd washed in front of guys, girls, children, adults, and the elderly since she was young. It was just a thing you did. Sometimes it was too much trouble to haul water back and heat it up, especially when that meant walking through the slums with your hands occupied. It was asking to be mugged. Padding up onto the grassy bank, Ruby peeled her wet top off and let it fall with a splat onto the ground, then pulled her robes up over her body, letting them fall to her feet before reaching under and pushing her soaked hose down as well. I'm dressed, she called, sitting down on the bank to dry off. The two boys turned. Their eyes fell on her, looking at her gray-robed form with pale feet poking out the bottom, then her wet clothes nearby. John went red and looked away, which was weird again. Yes, she knew what sex was, but she was about as covered as you could get, and in a thick gray robe no less. You're naked under there, aren't you? Yup, Ruby shrugged, not seeing the problem. Isn't everyone naked under their clothes? Yes, but I just... Ugh. John dipped down to hide his red face in the water, keeping his nose and eyes above. He mumbled something that came out as bubbles on the surface. His friend's son was a little more in control, though also a little red. You're a confident one, aren't you? Not many would skinny dip right outside the dorms. I needed to wash. Why not use the bath? Because it didn't make sense. Because it couldn't be carried downstairs to fill with water. There was no room for a fire to be lit to heat it up, and because she wasn't going to fill and empty it glass by glass. Also, the washroom smelled of vomit. I prefer the outdoors. Yeah, I get you there. Come on, John, man up. She's fine, we're fine. Stop looking like a tomato. Sun waded over to his friend and hauled him up. Not like she's going to tell on us and get us in trouble, right? The last bit was aimed at her, she was sure. Ruby shrugged, unsure what they'd get in trouble for, let alone why she'd be the one to rat on them. She could count the number of times she told a guard about a crime on no hands. You didn't snitch in the slums and get away with it. I won't tell. See, she's good, we're good. Sun turned to her. You might want to be careful about swimming in the river in the future, though. Some of the people here are pretty old-fashioned and wouldn't like the idea of a girl being so undressed around us guys. Oh, goody. Those types. Ruby knew them, a few living in the farms outside the walls. They'd given her grief in the past for wearing trousers and not a dress. Usually accompanied with shouts of how she'd never find a man and settle down if she acted like that. I'll be fine, she said. Besides, no one wakes up this early. Guards do, Sun pointed out. No, they don't. The next change of shift is in 2 hours, so I have an hour before anyone walks this way." Sun and John stared at her. "You, know the guard shifts already?" John asked. "That's kind of impressive. And worrying." "It was to let me have a swim without them seeing," she lied. "Ah, that makes sense. We'll not tell if you don't tell." Finally, something she understood. Mutual lying and covering one another for the benefit of all. Ruby smiled happily, nodded, making a gesture with her hand that they probably didn't understand, but which in the slums meant a universal agreement. "No one will find out from me," she said, putting it to words. "You two are guards, then?" "In training." Sun slapped a hand to John's chest. "It's a long-term kind of thing to become a collegium guard." "Does that mean you can go outside the walls?" "Yup," Sun said it proudly, standing tall with his hands on his hips. "We've been here 2 years now, starting on our 3rd soon. We can take leave outside the walls and even be sent on missions now. We're strong enough for it." So the guards could leave at will as long as they'd been at the collegium a while. That was good to know. Sun and John could be useful for her to get out and find Yang. The sun was rising, though, and she could hear some noise over by the older initiate's dorm. They'd be up and about soon. "I should go." She stood and picked up her wet clothes. "Where can I find you to talk?" You want to?" John sounded surprised. Sun grinned and slapped his chest. Oh, right." John flushed. "Well, we hang around the barracks most of the day. We train early in the morning, and a lot of initiates come to watch that. You could always talk to us after. Other than that, we have free time in the evenings." "You want to give her your timetable and life history as well?" Sun teased. John's face burned with color, and he punched Sun in the arm. Ruby laughed. In a way, they reminded her of home. They were nowhere near as crass as Yang and the Malachites could be, but compared to prissy anarchists like Weiss, they were downright dirty. She liked it. At the very least, they weren't nobles. That instantly made them easier to get along with. Saying her goodbye, she padded back to the dorms and snuck inside. A few people were up, but they didn't pay any attention to her. With her robes covering her from shoulder to her toes, they couldn't even tell what she was, or what she wasn't wearing underneath. Really don't see what those two were so worked up about. They even said I looked like a boy, so it's not like they saw anything. By the time she reached her and Weiss's shared room, Weiss was awake. And angry. "You left sick in the bowl!" she howled, shaking Ruby by her shoulders. Morning, Weiss." "Explain yourself!" "It's the morning, you're Weiss. I was trying to be polite." "Not the—" Weiss snarled like a wild animal. "The washroom! The vomit! Why?" "I couldn't throw it out the window." The choking sound Weiss made warned her she might have said something wrong. "And I didn't know what to do with it. I figured a servant would come and clean it up later." It seemed like something nobles would have those poor bastards do, alongside feeding them, wiping their behinds, and otherwise bowing and scraping to their every demand. Not that she'd ever seen a servant or a noble before the collegium, but it was just one of those things you knew. "Why didn't you spell it away?" Aha! So it was magic. "I don't know the spell." You... Snarling again, Weiss grabbed Ruby by her robe and dragged her into the washroom, pushing her up against the wall by the privy and pointing down at it. It was empty, clean, and to Ruby's surprise, smelling rather fresh. "Watch!" Weiss snapped. "Imagine this bowl is full right now. Once it is, you touch this." Ruby pressed her hand to a silvery stud on the top. "And the enchantment senses your body heat and then causes anything in the bowl to be transported away." There was a rush of water and fresh air in the bowl, like a miniature whirlpool appearing from nowhere. It vanished a moment later, leaving the bowl clean. Suddenly, there was a rush of clean air that followed, before that ended as well. Whoa. Whoa! Did they not have basic sanitary spells in Menagerie? "I didn't actually get to go to Menagerie," Ruby reminded her, falling back on what she quickly realized was going to become a reoccurring excuse. "Maybe they did, but I never got to see one. So this gets rid of pee and poop as well?" "Yes." Weiss had the horrified expression of a woman who just realized her roommate didn't know this, but knew she must have relieved herself sometime in the last 24 hours. "Don't tell me," Weiss snapped, eyes closed. I don't want to know, and we must be up soon. We have breakfast in half an hour and our first lessons in 2. At least you're not lazily sleeping in. That's one good trait, at least. Breakfast? Ruby's eyes lit up. Just greedy. Weiss shook her head and stormed out the washroom. I can't believe you're excited for food after you ate to the point of throwing up. Couldn't you at least show a little poise? I have a reputation to maintain, and you're going to ruin it. You don't have to spend time with me, Ruby pointed out, stepping from the washroom and into the bedroom area. She peeled her damp robes off, ignoring Weiss's presence. The girl spun on her heel, giving her space with wide eyes. She ignored her, picking out some fresh underclothes and a dry robe. You can go spend time with your other friends. That would not be fair, to leave you on your own, that is. You are new to Vale, and as one of the ruling elite, it is my responsibility to help you get used to life here. Weiss shuffled. Are you decent? I'm dressed, if that's what you mean. Good. Weiss turned, breathing a sigh of relief when Ruby was indeed in full uniform. A gray initiate robe over a blouse and some hose, with flat shoes and her Arcanum pinned to her breast. Weiss was the same, though her Arcanum was one of Vale. Today will be our first lessons, she said, a little excitement creeping in. I cannot wait to see what mysteries will be laid before us. Me too. That, at least, they could agree on. Weiss smiled tentatively at her. Ruby's stomach grumbled. But can we solve the mystery of whether we get food first? Glutton! Pig! I cannot believe you. Thanks for listening. I typically have a new chapter section out every Friday, or more often if my schedule allows. This has been Lynn Makes, narrating Arcanum by Coral Aran. Thanks again.